Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel with VAG Technique. We have a Sunday today, so there's no compressor noise, no tools, no nothing. It's absolutely quiet. But in this video, mainly, we will be working on this RS4, what you've seen in the previous videos. If you don't remember, I will leave you the link. It wasn't that long actually since we started the job, and obviously, yeah, we will be putting the engine, what you've seen on the previous video, what we bought, into the car. So if we'll have a look, there is engine already there, don't worry, it's not a second-hand engine, it's an engine what we built, but unfortunately I didn't have any beginning of the video, so, well, but I have the footage, that's good. So mainly Dave was building the engine, I was just next to him doing the footage, and I'm just gonna talk you through how we try to build the engine, if we build it and what we're using, how we doing everything up and so on and so on. So enjoy my 20-minute talking while Dave is working. Some footage is missing, but I will explain it during the footage, and enjoy it. Okay guys, so here we are, a couple of weeks backwards. Obviously, like I said, there is some footage missing, but not all of it. Dave is already installing the spray jets, which are important to lubricate the piston rings. The only footage was actually missing is how we were measuring the main end bearings for the crankshaft, because I wasn't in the workshop. So all that measurement was actually done, and we were happy with it. We are using race bearings, which are aftermarket. In this case, we didn't use the genuine ones. The genuine ones usually have the yellow, red, black marking for the thickness, and this one has like universal fitting, but we always check it before we actually install the crankshaft. So all the clearances are in the spec. So the spray jets were installed. We didn't use new bolts because we don't have to replace them. We did put Loctite according to the manual and tied it to the Newton meter spec. So we will continue now with some other measurements. We didn't also check yet what's the clearance on the conrod bearings, which we're actually doing now. We are using these plastic gauges, what we purchased, and I think they are quite easy to use, and obviously will give you quite good readings from what you have to get. We don't really want to do it with the complicated way to be measuring when it's tied together and just doing it all the way around, which is much more complicated. This way with the lubricant, how you're going to tighten it to the first Newton meter spec, which in this case was 50 Newton meters. It will squeeze the plastic gauge, and obviously they will also give you like a paper with the readings, what you've seen in a minute, and that will give you an idea what's the clearance when it's tight to the Newton meter spec. So obviously the whole process takes time. The reason why I edit the video how it's edited, so it will give you a bit of a feeling like how much time you have to actually spend just to prepare to reassemble the whole engine, put it back together, and it's not just like we are throwing parts on the crankshaft and the whole block and tighten them together. So Dave right now is removing the bottom part of the conrods, and you can see the plastic gauge how it's basically squeezed. So we have a very nice equal sort of shape, and now this is the plastic gauge measure, which is basically in the kit, and in this case it's 0.050 millimeter, which is in the spec according to the engine manual. So we will do all conrods. The reason again why we're checking it is you never know, there might be a faulty bearing from the factory. Sometimes it might be different bearing in the packaging, it might be problem with the conrod himself. So there might be all sort of issues where you can actually have while you're putting the engine back together, and it's definitely better to make sure that everything what's going on to the engine is double checked and everything is spinning freely, and especially it have all the clearances as it should have. The clearances are very important on any engine really, especially when you're building a high performance engines. You have to be in different values compared to a normal street engine, I would say, and obviously you have to have the same readings on all conrods or all main bearings to the block. The reason for that is that basically the conrod bearings or the main end bearings are not physically touching the surface of the crankshaft, it's floating on oil, and depends on what gap you have, it's affecting the oil pressure, it's also affecting like how it's floating in between the materials, And the last thing we want to have is different oil pressure on different ends. It can actually cause some kind of overheating, or the crankshaft will have some excessive play in the block and you might have a long-term issue. So we're also checking it to make the customer or the owner more comfortable that it was done, and obviously we've done maximum to prevent from any kind of a damage, so it wasn't just put it back together as it was from a scrap and there you go, drive the car. Next up, when we check all the clearances, we were happy with them. Obviously if there were some different readings, we have to contact the machine shop, or we have to be checking why the readings are different. In this case everything was 0.050 millimeters, so we can continue. The pistons were assembled with Mahler rings. Again, we didn't use the genuine ones, and obviously the Mahler is like genuine supplier for piston rings for Audi and some other manufacturers as well. We're using these rings for many years, never had a problem with them really. Obviously before we put them on the pistons we did check the gaps, they were all good, and again before we put in the pistons into the cylinder block we have to place them so they're like 120 degrees from each other, so it's not in one line and we're not losing any compressions. We also have a new tool for piston assembly. As you can see, it's a tube which is changing the diameter to the piston bore or to the cylinder bore, and obviously it's much better than the previous one what we have with the clamps. You don't have to be holding the clamps and pushing it in hardly. All you have to do is just place it to the cylinder where it's going and nicely push it in. Of course, as you can see, everything is lubricated with engine oil, and also we are installing the pistons with conrods before the crankshaft is there. Reason for that is, as you can probably see, that the spray jet which is in the block is sometimes in the way, and the whole engine is quite tight, and when you installing the pistons with conrods in opposite way, they might get in way each other. So it's much simpler to actually do it this way. When the crankshaft is still not installed, you will have much more place to manipulate with the conrod just in case it gets stuck. And obviously when the pistons are in, all we have to do is just put the crankshaft in place and it should fit on one of the conrod bearings straight away, and the rest of them will be basically just pushed on. So I think this is the last piston which is coming in. Now we have one more. So again, time wise, it's just doing it slowly, make sure the piston rings are not getting stuck onto the bore or onto the block, and definitely not get damaged anything. And of course the preparation before we even get to the point of installing, like cleaning the whole engine block, cleaning all the surfaces, cleaning all the channels for the coolant and for the oil, is just time-wise absolutely mental. But all 8 pistons with conrods are installed now, so we will turn the engine block around and we will continue with the crankshaft what I mentioned. And before we actually put the cradle on as well, we will be installing the conrods, which mean the crankshaft will be just put it onto the bearings, and we will just be turning it and tighten it down for the conrods one by one. And here is the crankshaft. What you've seen on the footage, those are the truss bearings, which again are replaced for genuine parts for a new ones. And here we are assembling the conrods. I am actually surprised that the RS5 have these type of conrods, so they machine with the pin, which I think is probably better than the older ones which are like broke with the machine and you can only fit them where they will fit. Of course, we never try to mix things like be changing the top and bottom part of the conrod, because I personally think how it's come from the factory, you shouldn't mix the bottom and the top just in case. But that's why we're actually checking everything to make sure it will fit and it's spinning nice and freely. So again, everything was cleaned up and then lubricated again. In this case, in the menu, you probably seen that we are lubricating the bolts as well. The reason for that is the bolt is basically going through the threads much more easier, and when you tighten it down, it will give you much better reading when you tighten to the Newton meter spec without any friction between the surface and the bolt. So according to the manual, they have to be lubricated. First stage, Dave is just tightening down basically so it will touch, so we can every single time when we tighten something down, we can actually spin the engine and try it out if everything is spinning nice and freely. And Dave is very precise at these sort of jobs, and obviously his experience with building engines is absolutely massive. He's done a huge build himself on a car what he drive. And as a guy working for us in the garage, he's independent person. He's capable to build the engine by himself. Obviously, as a company, we try to make decisions together when it comes to something like bottom end build-up, clearances and all this stuff. So we are taking responsibility for it as a company, not as a single person. But yeah, Dave is very good at these sort of jobs. He's checking everything, he's looking for things, and obviously if something is wrong, he always shout out like, guys, this is not spinning freely, I don't think this is right, we should do it this way, that way. So experience is talking from him, and we are finishing here the last conrods with the bolts. Obviously they will be just tied down, so it will hold together. And once we will put the cradle with the silicone and the gasket on, we will be spinning the engine again. We will be tightening to Newton meter spec, because the 50 Newton meters is not that much, but obviously 90 degrees is quite a lot. So here we have the thrust bearing. Don't worry, we didn't forget to put them on. Obviously we prefer to put the crankshaft in and then just turn them in, so they will not fall out or anything. And here we have the first gaskets coming on. I did done a footage with the original packaging just in case you want to build the engine. You have the part number over there. If you're searching for all these gaskets, I must say there's quite loads of gaskets going on there, and you gotta be super careful, replace them, clean them, make sure everything is sitting properly, because that's where all the oil pressure is going from the bottom to the top. So right now Dave is putting the cradle on the bottom of the engine basically, and the bearings were installed already with the thrust bearings on the top. You have to put the bottom end thrust bearing basically on before you put them on there. So right now we are installing new bottom end bolts. Obviously you gotta replace them because they are stretching. And the last thing we want to have is that the bolt is actually so long it will not get completely tight, and the whole Newton meter spec where you tie this, basically the bottom of the bolt hitting the engine block, and you might even end up with the snap bolts, or it will be not tight as it shouldn't be tight. In this case, you probably did notice that the bolts are going in dry. The reason for that is that these bolts shouldn't be lubricated according to the manual. So when we start building the engines, and obviously we didn't have the experience, we did try to lubricate everything because it makes more sense when you tighten things down, so it's going much easier and stuff. But in this case, the manuals are very precise, and I even done a mistake very long time ago when I was building an engine for a customer, and I did lubricate the bolts, and obviously I couldn't get to the Newton meter spec. It was going in so nicely that I end up snapping the bolt on the end of the day, and we have to replace all the bolts again. So a bit of a waste of time and money, but lesson learned. And the manuals are very important to read and be checking everything. So again, we just tighten it so the bolts basically touch the surface. And here's Dave spinning the engine. Basically everything is spinning nice and freely. Nothing is seizing up, nothing is making too much resistance. And the engine will spin even nicer and smoother when it's going to be fully tight, because the bearings, they actually have like locks where you've seen on the footage, but the main thing how they're sitting is in the surface of the cradle and the block. So when they're not fully squashed in, it's basically not making a nice radius. So Right now Dave is tightening it to, I believe, 30 Newton meters. You have to start with the longer bolts, then the shorter bolts, and then the outer bolts, which are torque 30s in this case. Then it's gonna be 50 Newton meters and 90 degrees, if I'm correct. So again, I'm not really jumping the footage. We are turning the engine after we've done the first sequence of tightening it down. And again, everything is spinning nice and freely. There's no point where the engine wants to sort of seize up or stop, or something is making resistance that you can't continue turning the engine by 360 degrees. Again, I'm leaving the footage long, very long. For somebody maybe boring, but we just want to try to show you like how much time it actually takes to do the job properly, and you have to make sure you tighten everything to the Newton meter spec and in the proper sequence. So next up we are putting this plastic separator plate. It's very important. If you ain't gonna put it on how the crankshaft is basically spinning in the engine, it can create like a vacuum wave and it can affect the oil level while the engine is running. Again, we are putting all new gaskets, which are from TPS genuine. You always gotta replace them. And we are installing silicone. So we are not using genuine silicone, we are using Dirco. The silicone is very good actually, we're using it for a couple of years. Never had a problem with it. And it's also rated to a good temperature, and especially is not peeling off, because some of the silicones, as you can see, when you squeeze it, it's sticking into the engine and out from the engine, and how inside of the engine you have hot oil and everything, it can actually wash the silicone off and it can get to the pickup pipe, oil pump, or somewhere into the internals, which in case with this silicone we never had an issue with it, like it's peeling or something. And we have another new gasket for the oil pump. Obviously the oil pump is not replaced, it's absolutely stupid money, and we never had a problem with the oil pumps. The only reason why we're not using the oil pump from the original engine is that it has loads of debris coming through it, and we don't want to have debris from the old engine going into the new engine. So this oil pump which is installed to the engine is from the second-hand engine what we bought. So the engine from the machine shop was returned, cylinder heads were fully done, what you will see in a minute. We are also replacing all the springs for the valves for inlet and exhaust, and obviously the cylinder heads are skimmed, the valves are brushed in, stump valve seals are replaced, and also the guides are replaced, because the main reason why these engines suffered with any kind of oil starvation or it's consuming oil, it's because of the valves have basically loads of play, and how they're moving, the stump valve seal is just not sealing around the valve, and the oil is basically burned through the valves into the combustion chamber. Dave is continuing with another holder for a gear setup, which is there for a power steering pump and air conditioning. In this case, this is a RS4, so the power steering is basically fully electric. So one of the gears which is sticking out of the block will have like an end cap on. Again, you have to replace these O-rings, which are very important for oil distribution for the gear setup on the back. And the last thing coming on is the holder himself with the bolts. So again, everything is tied to the Newton meter spec. Whatever we are discussing with TPS, they always tell us like if we have to replace the bolts or we can use them again. Whatever bolts needs to be replaced, we always buy them from TPS brand new, because just in case something, it's affecting the warranty actually. So timing chain setup is installed, the bottom timing chain setup. And the reason why we do it this way now, because the head gasket is basically overlapping the rear timing chain cover, the bottom rear timing chain cover, and obviously we don't want to have any kind of a damage. Rear crankshaft seal was installed meanwhile, and these two seals, which is for the gear setup, which is sticking out, what I mentioned. So whatever we actually remove, open up, and there's a gasket, we always have to put a new gasket. So right now we have cylinder head gaskets coming out. Again, nice genuine, nice blue color. And next up will be the cylinder head. So you can see how the head gasket is actually overgapping, and the whole chain setup was actually done, so the cylinder head will be just put on, and then we can time up the engine onto the cylinder heads, and it's all good to go. So you've seen the nice shiny cylinder head from skimming, and the machine shop what we're using is doing really good job for us, and obviously we are very happy with them. And here we are putting the camshafts on. Again, I was away for a couple of hours, and meanwhile I was away, Dave was actually trying the camshaft without the rocker arms first, how they're actually turning in the cylinder head, and he did found that one of the inlet camshaft was not spinning freely. So we did find out there was like a small damage on the edge of the cylinder head, which was causing the camshaft to get stuck at some point. So that was a easy solution for it. However, this is the point when somebody like Dave is putting it together, and you have to be very careful, like you check everything, because if he didn't check it and we just actually put it on, there might be a problem, like the camshaft might overheat in the cylinder head, it might actually seized up, the timing can jump, and it can do loads of serious internal damage. But luckily, like I said, Dave is that kind of a guy who's super careful when it comes to building an engine. He's precise, and he's double checking everything before he will continue with some other steps. So the head gaskets and the cylinder heads are installed. Of course, we are putting new cylinder head bolts. Again, they are stretching. I believe they're tied to 2 Newton meter spec, and then twice 90 degrees. When it comes to these bolts, we are always lubricating them. So we just lubricate the thread a bit, and obviously also the head to the washer, so the bolt is basically sliding nicely onto the surface, whereas the washer in the cylinder head. So we can continue with injectors. These injectors are not new, obviously they're stupid money. I believe it's like 280-90 pounds per injector. The only thing what we've done is new seals, the new thermo seal on the bottom, and of course new gaskets in the valley pan with the oil valve. If you've seen the previous video, you can probably tell that the catalytic converter was dead, so even the previous company who built the engine managed to put it back together somehow. The engine wouldn't run properly because the catalytic converter was stuck. So we are replacing them for Euro 6 high flow 200 cell catalytic converters. Miroslav is actually rewelding them to the original spot, and you can tell that the catalytic converter what was there, that's dead. There's absolutely no flow coming through it, and the cylinder will just not empty the exhaust gases, and it will cause problems after first startup, I believe, and it can even cause serious internal damage. So the engine is installed into the chassis now. We always turn the engine before the startup and just make sure the oil pressure gets everywhere, and this is the first startup when the engine was built and put it back in.
Co tam je? To tam není ani v tom, vole.
So I'm very hoping that wasn't the boringest 20 minutes while I was talking into the footage. But yeah, the job was pretty steady, pretty good, not really big issues. I wouldn't say something was missing, everything was here pretty much. Like I said, the engine was in this car meant to be for our RS5 what we bought a year ago. And since then, soon as our engine is done, ready to go into our car, we just put it in a customer car because we think it's like priority really. But we have another RS5 outside with the drop valve in the cylinder. So engine was for our RS5 in the workshop again is going to that car again. So we just keep swapping them around, so we're just gonna end up probably buying another engine. So we have one in stock and we have to finish our car obviously. But yeah, during the video, like I mentioned, we only have 2 issues. The first issue was the cable going from the gear lever to the gearbox. Dave didn't actually put the bracket where the bolt should go. That was easy sort out problem. And the other problem was that when we dropped the heads to the machine shop, there's a bolt next to the high pressure fuel pump, and obviously that bolt was unscrewed, it was fully removed. They didn't saw it, I didn't saw it, so obviously it was like sucking false air through there, so the bolt was put in place, it's all good. Since then we've done like 90 miles, no issues. So we clean up everything like I mentioned. We're probably gonna do another 130-40 miles because I have to go to the Manchester airport. So the reason why we're doing the mileage, we are running the engine in a nice calm area. We are checking everything, and when we're gonna do like 200-300 miles, we're gonna drain the oil out. So check the filter, check for any leaks, put the covers back on, and we can contact the customer. So right now I'm closing the bonnet because I have to go to Manchester airport to do some mileage, and obviously I'll keep you updated if something goes wrong. But so far we've done like over 200 miles. We're still gonna do probably like 150 miles, and I'm really hoping there'll be no issues. And of course, as usual, there were some issues. Obviously we've done over 300 miles with the car. Before the customer took the car, we've done an oil change and a filter, and we checked the filter if there's no debris or some metal bits. So I did enjoy the car. Obviously the consumption was brilliant. I was doing average like 22 miles to the gallon, which is like typical V8 consumption really. The whole price up was over £15,000, what I mentioned in the previous video. There were some additional things like the 2 oil tensioners and some small bits which we didn't add to the bill in total, so it was still the same amount of money what we agreed on the beginning. The job was done pretty quickly from our side. Since we started till we finished, it was like 3 weeks, which wasn't that bad. And yeah, the whole mess up actually was because when we drove the car there were no engine lights, and as soon as the owner took the vehicle, after 1 or 2 days the engine light came on. So he plugged it on the diagnostic what he had available, and there were like 2 fault codes running Rich, Bang 1 and Bang 2. Unfortunately, the car was remapped by MRC, the cold start was deleted and some other things. So we decided to actually flush it to a fully stock map, and since then the owner didn't contact us. This is like a couple of weeks later. Since I'm editing the video, we're finishing off, he didn't ring me since, so I'm really hoping that the fault code was resolved by remapping, because obviously MRC, what I know, they're doing the maps quite with loads of overfueling, so they try to cool down the combustion chamber and stuff with the fuel. But looks like an happy ending. There will be some fault codes or whatever. The car will be coming to our garage. I'll let you know in case something went wrong, but so far looks good. And yeah, I'm gonna continue editing some more videos for you guys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Take care for now.